So what do you think is the common denominator then that you found holds back many people?
I think it's three things. It's fear, trauma, and limited thinking. So in my new work, which I'm in the process of updating my book proposal for a literary agent, I kind of created this new model of self-actualization. So if you think of self-actualization in the tip of a triangle in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it suggests you've reached some pinnacle or ultimate state from which there is no deviation or fall. But I would say that self-actualization is actually a model of concentric circles. So it's a dynamic state of expansion and contraction. So if you think about all of these concentric circles and you're existing at this one circle, which is a level of consciousness, and these circles are all made up of tiny dots, which are possibilities in your life. If you want to get to the next goal, the next level of consciousness, whatever, you have to overcome that chasm to get to the next level of the circle. And I would say you have to overcome fear, trauma, or limited thinking. And it's almost like we've all been so ingrained into this because it's a part of our human experience. But I think the growth and the liberation occurs when you make that jump, when you surrender and trust into something that's bigger than you, and you have to really trust your internal vision.
Welcome back, everybody, to the From Crisis to Justice podcast. I'm your host, Parag Amin, and I'm joined by a very special guest today, Tim Shields. Since walking away from a corporate career in marketing and advertising in late 2015, Tim has made a living as an author, writing coach, editor, and literary collaborator. A quote from Dr. Joe Dispenza about Tim's book titled A Curious Year in the Great Vivarium Experiment is an honest, vulnerable, transformational travel odyssey into the heart and soul of a man, using the power of gratitude and intention. No matter where the reader is in their life, A Curious Year in the Great Vivarium Experiment is a story about the magic that occurs in awakening to the unlimited potential of your life's journey. Welcome, Tim. Thank you so much for being on today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So tell us, what made you shift from this corporate career, seemingly relatively traditional career in marketing and advertising, into this journey of you becoming an author, writing coach, editor, and literary collaborator?
Well, I never actually wanted to be in the corporate world. I decided I wanted to be a writer at 17, and I started keeping a journal, and I wanted to be a writer so bad I started asking to be used as an instrument of peace. And somehow I thought coming out of college, somebody was just going to pay me to travel the world and write about it. Little uninformed there. So, I was in New York City and I was kind of chasing the dot-com bust era, chasing IPOs and everything. And I moved to Seattle and I was there for 19 years. And, you got to make a living. And I wound up working with Microsoft and T-Mobile and all these corporations. And I think in 2015, I got the opportunity to help Dr. Joe Dispenza edit his blogs. And then about 9 months in, he was like, what would you think about helping me with my new book, Becoming Supernatural? And I was like, watch how fast I quit my job. So I quit my 9-to-5 and pretty much have been doing this ever since. It was a pretty big first break to have.
And what gave you that courage to make that leap?
I mean, because it was in alignment with my passion. And, I've been quietly working on my craft for years, writing terrible screenplays and starts of books and everything like that. But there was, on the human level, I was full of doubt and imposter syndrome and, everything else that goes along with that. But kind of at the soul level, I knew that writing was my calling. And from kind of a younger age, I knew that I was a deeper thinker than most of my contemporaries. And when I had the opportunity, it was funny because I was at this moment where I was either going to go, actually, this was the second book after Joe Dispenza, but I was, trying to figure out what to do. And I was about to go, maybe I was interviewing at Google but I didn't really want to do it. And then this other opportunity came up and that was it. I just moved into that and that became my new path. And it certainly hasn't been an easy one, but, I think out of all the arts, writing is probably the hardest because it's a long man's game. So you have to live a lot of life experience to have something significant to write about, I believe. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you say it was your calling, how did you know it was your calling?
well, I had my sister's boyfriend. I probably was 10 years old when I met him. He was like 19, and he was this super bright light, brilliant guy, good looking, smart, athletic, had an incredible memory. And he was the first person that ever made being smart look cool to me. And he was an aspiring writer. And he was like, if you want to write, you got to start keeping a journal. And then at 17, I went to a Grateful Dead concert, not really knowing what I was doing, and took a pretty big dose of mushrooms. And I would say I kind of experienced what I call now like unity consciousness. And it was just, I was like, whatever this thing is that we're involved in life, it's so much bigger than us. And I just wanted to learn about it. And, I was at a young age, I was writing about time and space and dimensions. And, I think the next kind of revolution is the spiritual revolution, because we've chartered the external world, and the next one is the internal world. And I think that's where we're going. I believe that's where we're going.
Yeah, and so can you expound on that a little bit? Like what is unity consciousness?
Well, it's we live in this world of fear and separation, and it's the controlling mechanism of the world. But I think that people are waking up to something greater, and if we can let go of the fear, we can move in to kind of the next evolution of our species, if that makes sense.
So it makes sense. So are you saying that, well, let me back up. Do you think that fear is innate, meaning like all humans are born with some level of fear?
I mean, I think fear is programming conditioning. Like we come into this world as just a little ball of love. And then we have, the sort of the first stage is our family. And then we move out into school and society and everything else. And then, we get wounded along the way. And then we start to protect ourselves. And then we close our heart off from other people. So I don't think it's innate. I think it's a part of the human experience. But I think if you want to achieve anything, whether you're a writer, an entrepreneur, or a lawyer, you have to, at many points in your life, you have to jump over that line of fear, and you have to move into surrender and trust in sort of that
Mhm.
internal guidance system that's calling you to something bigger and greater.
Yeah, so how would you separate these two types of fear? I mean, there's the type of fear that can literally keep you alive. For example, let's say handling a poisonous snake in the wild,
For
uh,
sure.
versus the fear of public speaking.
Yeah. Well, I would say, obviously, the fear of a snake or a tiger is what has propagated our species and, not made us food to larger species. But I think the fear that we all have occurred in our youth. I call them our core wounds or the soul ache. And um, it's like if you don't do that internal inventory to find out where all these things happen and occur throughout your life, if you're in a business meeting or in an argument with your wife or your girlfriend or something, and that core wound gets triggered, you're going back at this person as like the fourth grader, but you're unaware of it, and you're an adult, but you are acting out of this wound, which is a fear. So you have to become very aware of where these things happen in our life, and then that is where sort of liberation to step into the greater version of yourself occurs. I believe when you don't jump out at that dangling carrot of the emotion, and you're self-regulating, and you are aware of who you're being, where your programs are coming from, and why you're responding to a situation the way you're responding.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think is the common denominator then that you found holds back many people?
I think it's three things: it's fear, trauma, and limited thinking. So in my new work, which I'm in the process of updating my book proposal for a literary agent, I kind of created this new model of self-actualization. So if you think of self-actualization um, in the tip of a triangle in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it suggests you've reached some pinnacle or ultimate state from which there is no deviation or fall. But I would say that self-actualization is actually a model of concentric circles. So it's a dynamic state of expansion and contraction. So if you think about all of these concentric circles and you're existing at this one circle, which is a level of consciousness, and these circles are all made up of tiny dots, which are possibilities in your life. If you want to get to the next goal, the next level of consciousness, whatever, you have to overcome that chasm to get to the next level of the circle. And I would say you have to overcome fear, trauma, or limited thinking. And it's almost like we've all been so ingrained into this because it's a part of our human experience. But I think the growth and the liberation occurs when you make that jump, when you surrender and trust into something that's bigger than you. And you have to really trust your internal vision.
And do you think that's the key to overcoming fear, trauma, and limited thinking, or is there some other key, or are there other
I
keys?
mean, I'm not a psychologist. There's a lot of keys, but again, I think it comes down to like self-awareness and trusting your own life. I mean, it's taken me years to trust my own life. And I've tried to get off this writing train a bunch of times. And every time I was like, I just want a more secure path. I'm going to go to Amazon and make a ton of money. And then every time I was right there, life just put me right back on the writing train. And when I kind of surrendered to that and I was like, all right, this is it. This is my calling. I'm going for it. Like doors just started to open. So I think when in this new work, I said, when you act in the alignment of your mind, body, and spirit in right actions, right thinking, right language, and right feeling, you become like the boring machine and matter conforms to your wills. And the boring machine being the thing that tunnels through mountains. So as you start into this alignment with your higher calling, your dream, whatever, serendipities and synchronicities start to show up in your life and they become this guiding path. And that's where you surrender and trust. Like, okay, this doesn't really make sense, but this thing showed up. This thing showed up. I call them breadcrumbs. Like a breadcrumb is something that leaps into your internal awareness with a registering force. Maybe it's you see something that doesn't make sense, or you have a conversation with somebody at a bus stop or something. And on its own, it kind of means nothing. It's just curious. But then they start lining up, and that starts to become the guidance system. And the great challenge, I think, of life is trusting that guidance system, which ultimately is trusting yourself.
Well, do you think the guidance system always leads you to the right path for yourself?
It always has. When I don't trust myself is when I go down the wrong path, or I get in trouble, or I meet a lot of resistance. And it's just like going into a dead end, and you just got to turn around and go back out and sort of start moving in a new path and keep your awareness open and just keep moving towards whatever that dream or goal is.
Yeah, and there's an aspect that I refer to as kind of like the two paths, like the one internal sense of this is the right thing to do, even if
Mhm.
it's the hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And that many times requires far more discipline to follow that path because that's the right path for you than the alternative path, which many times your brain might try to trick you and say, look, just go down this path. It's easier. There's less resistance. Why do you think there's that? And one, do you agree or disagree? And two, if you do agree, why do you think that is? Like, why is it that on the one hand, there's this internal conscious knowledge of what the right path is, and yet there's some form of resistance that's trying to guide you towards that easier path that most of the time is not the right path?
Well, the one path that's not the right path is about fear and security. And then the right path requires, like you said, discipline and commitment. I mean, I've wanted to be a writer for 30 plus years now. And it's definitely not an easy path. It's not a secure path. But I mean, I get to work with I call it dream tethering. So I'm tethered to this dream in the future. And it's like this energetic bond with it. And when you get into that alignment, it starts pulling you forward. And again, that's where the serendipities and synchronicities show up.
Yeah, and so I've heard and read some of Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, and I know he talks a little bit about this idea of like quantum mechanics, and to some extent, I don't think he uses this phrase, but this is how I think about it, the law of attraction idea.
Yeah.
And so there's that. There's like that metaphysical quantum mechanics.
Hmm.
You attract the type of energy, your vibe attracts your tribe kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, there's like the more practical or just almost like common sense type approach of, look, I'm generally going to find what I'm looking for, meaning like if I look around the room, if any of us look around the room that we're in right now and we try to look for the color green, we're more likely to find that color green around us than if we're looking for the color green, but then we happen to spot red. I feel like it's less likely to necessarily register in our minds simply because we're not really actively looking for it. So how do you think about this? Is it like the quantum mechanical idea or quantum physics idea, or are we talking about, hey, look, just on a practical day to day level, if you're looking for it, you're more likely to spot those opportunities. Just like, if you're looking for a black Mustang on the road because you just got one, you're more likely to spot more black Mustangs. I don't know that somehow metaphysically more of them have been attracted to you in that moment simply because you're thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Dr. Joe Dispenza would say sort of the thought sends the signal out and the feeling pulls it back. But, if you are focused on that green car or something like that, then that is where your point of awareness is. That is what, and so you could, in some regards, just say your awareness is more broadened, or you could be pulling that to you. I mean, we would have to go much deeper into quantum physics and all that, but like I said, that dream tether. If you're focused on that dream, then that is where your point of awareness is, and you are moving towards that, and at the same time, you are pulling that towards you. That's my belief and my experience.
Okay. And what kind of principles can entrepreneurs apply regarding consciousness and intention as it relates to business challenges or navigating life in general?
Well, I'll tell you some of my one of my biggest lessons is actually getting a lawyer. I was trying to do everything by myself for years, and it just wasn't working, and I signed some bad deals, and I lost some money around it. So I think that it's really important to get the right team around you. So whether depending on what you're doing, the lawyer, the social media, the literary agent, you have to have those people who are fighting for you, or I'm blanking on the right word, but
At
fighting
least
for you.
looking out for you.
What's that?
At least looking out for you.
Yeah, they're going to bat for you and they're looking out for you. Yeah. So that's been in the last year probably the biggest lesson I've learned, and it's changed things. I feel much more secure like having a lawyer and going into contracts, and I was very avoidant of social media because I just didn't want to deal with it. And I have a team to deal with that now, so I just have to record it. And in my business, and probably the music business as well, it used to be about the quality of the work. Now it's about followers. It's almost like everything's about followers. So I call it the crap culture, the pop culture crap machine. So it's like elevating the wrong voices and, putting less talented people, etc., up, perhaps because that's not across the board, but in a lot of cases, giving some influencer a book deal or something when they have nothing to say or add to, the quality of anybody's life or anything like that. So, I mean, another thing I think is that it's important when you're dream tethering or in the dream or creating anything, if you are in alignment with some sort of service aspect that, again, for lack of a better word, the universe is conspiring for you to a greater degree, because it's not just about the individual. It's not just about the ego, but you're trying to bring something better to the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think that humans, the vast majority at least, are hardwired to want to be of service to other people and to other living beings.
Yeah.
And I think that we get a lot of our self esteem, a lot of our energy, sense of well being, however you want to phrase it, a lot of that feeling good aspect of life from being of service. But then, yet on the flip side, we see a lot of people spewing hate, negativity, and somehow there's also a lot of those out there, and there's a lot of people that gravitate towards that and follow that. Can you try to help us make sense of that? How do the two align or
I
square?
mean, I would just say that they are, at a, again, for lack of a better word, at a lower level of consciousness. And I think you just have to maintain your high level of consciousness, connection, love, unity, service. And, you have to be the living example. And it's like the metaphor, rising tide lifts all boats. If you stay at that level and you're kicking ass in life and all this stuff, people are going to be like, what are they doing that I'm not doing? And then you become the example. And then they start asking you, what are you doing? And, I'm amazed at all the people that are like asking me about meditation now and spirituality and stuff like that. And I think it's a good sign that there's a new awakening sweeping across the planet. We're still a long ways off, but I think we're at the start of something new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people are much more conscious about it in terms of intentionally trying to either meditate or be spiritual or whatever it is, be it one with the universe or be at peace with each other. So, what kind of lessons can you share from your travels and how that might influence decision making under pressure that uh, we can all learn from?
Well, my first book, A Curious Year in the Great Vivarium Experiment, uh, basically I had a decade of sick parents. And when my mother passed away, closing that decade, I bought a one-way ticket to India. And I was just doing this gratitude and intention exercise. Somebody had told me to do it. I thought I was ready for my mother's passing, and then it was like the rug was swept out from under me, and I was very lost and kind of scared. And this woman said, "Okay, you're a writer. I want you to do this exercise. I want you to write down 5 things you're grateful for and 5 things you want to create. And you're going to find that the things that you create today are going to be the things you're grateful for in the future." And that actually created the story arc of the book, because I just bought a one-way ticket in India to find this story. And I was just writing things down like, I want to be of service when I travel. And I wound up volunteering for this guy who's like the grandfather of environmental law in India. He's won the equivalent of 2 Nobel Prizes in grassroots environmentalism, sued the state of India over 20 years to create a green zone around the Taj Mahal. Every Friday for a bunch of years, the Supreme Court of India held special cases for the voiceless people of India. So I was I remember driving to the airport with like with my sister and my 12-year-old niece in the back, and I almost had a breakdown. I'm like, what am I doing? I bought a one-way ticket to India on a continent of 23 billion people. I didn't know anybody. But I just had this intention that I kept putting out there, and everything unfolded out of that. And I think the biggest thing that I learned, and I try to remind myself all the time, and I tell other people, and this comes down to surrender and trust, but when you jump, the net appears. But when you're standing at the edge of that, looking down into the abyss of the unknown, it's terrifying. But that is where you learn. That's where you grow. The growth is in the unknown self. You know everything about this present moment, about your past. But if you want to move into a new dimension of your being, you have to move into the unknown. You have to jump into the unknown self. And again, when you jump, the net appears. I mean, it's happened to me so many times. I volunteered at orphanage in India. In Tanzania. I tried to do my own travel show in Europe. Um, Done all sorts of crazy things, because as a young man, I knew that if I wanted to have big things to write about, I had to have big experiences. But it wasn't without like fear and sometimes terror every time I was on that plane going to another country, having no idea what was ahead of me. But I made the decision, I jumped into it, and everything just unfolded exactly how it was supposed to. Actually, far better than I could have ever imagined it would, because I took the chance to jump into the unknown.
I love that. So the more you do that, jumping into the unknown, is it like the easier it gets, or is it hard every time?
I mean, I think it's hard every time, but then you have this body of life experience behind you. So then you kind of develop the trust. So you come up against the fear, you come up against that line, but you look back and say, okay, well, historically speaking, throughout the course of my life, this has always worked out in a better way than I could have ever imagined it. So as the more bigger jumps you make, the more you trust.
And trust in who? Who's building this net when you jump?
I
That's
mean,
gonna.
I think it's trusting in yourself. I think it's trusting in sort of the abundant and generous nature of the universe or God or whatever, the quantum field, whatever you want to call it. But I think it begins with trusting yourself, and that's a hard thing. I mean, that's something I've been trying to master for years. And if I had to distill my work into two pillars, it would be in surrender and trust, because that's what I'm trying to master in this life. Because wanting to be a writer or a voice of generation or something is a pretty big mountain to go up. But I said in my first book that the first book is kind of about the dream of the 17-year-old self. It's the self-actualization of me moving into the writer within me. And I said, the dream of the 17-year-old self is like shooting a grappling hook out into the future. And if you're strong enough, focused enough, and determined enough to stay on the line, you're going to get where you want to go. But the external environment is always going to try and knock you off the line. And then at the end of the day, the external environment is just a mirror to your internal environment.
Yeah, I love that. And can you just briefly maybe explain what you mean by that in terms of the external environment being a mirror to
Well,
your internal
I
environment?
mean, if I despite the fact that I've taken all these huge leaps and jumps, I kind of always thought of myself as like a fearful person. It's probably like the projection of my mother's, love, which was in a sense protection and fear upon me. So I took all these risks to kind of, swing the pendulum in the other way. And where was I going with that? The fear, right?
Yeah, so we were talking about the world being a
Oh, okay,
reflection.
yeah, yeah. So it's like if you're always looking for protection and fear in your external world, then that's what's going to show up. And that's being projected from your internal world. If you have an abundant mindset, if you are joyful, if you, whatever that more positive quality is, that is what's going to show up in your world. And I've, through Dr. Joe Dispenza's work and my own personal work, it's, you know, systematically altering that little fear mechanism. Like every time you sit down to meditate and you quiet that voice, and I move into the future of what I want to create and manifest when I'm meditating, and you do that through the feeling. So it's almost like you feel the event ahead of the event, and that's kind of what pulls it to you.
You feel the outcome of that future event.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, what do you think is the difference between an abundance mindset of there's plenty of everything to go around for everybody on the one hand, and then also this idea of not being wasteful? Meaning, let's say somebody thinks like opportunities come around every day. I
Hmm.
don't need to take advantage of the opportunity today that's at my door today because another advantage or opportunity will come around tomorrow and then the next day and then the next day. So
Yeah.
why should I act now if the world is truly abundant?
Well, that's why you have to be really in touch with your sort of internal navigation system, because I think, you know, the more aware you are, the easier it is to spot the real opportunities. I've been very judicious about who I worked with over the years, and I've gone, long periods of time without a paycheck. A writer, you get paid in bulks, and so I've actually, caused myself some uncomfortable times, but if I'm not passionate about, working with somebody and I'm just taking it for a paycheck, then I'm not going to deliver my best work. And that is, you know, even if I'm a ghostwriter or, I just have a with byline, that is me who's putting this out there. So this happened. Have you ever heard of a guy named Dr. Zach Bush?
No.
He's a very incredible human being. He's like a triple board certified doctor and probably one of the global thought leaders on our microbiome and how it relates to our soil systems. He's really big on regenerative farming and everything like that. And I heard him on a podcast and I was like, who the hell is this guy? I got to work with him. And I kind of reached out to a couple people that could have known him and knew him. And it just didn't work out. But I kept writing in my intention journal that I was going to work with this guy. And at some point I got invited to this little research, gathering at UCSD. And there was only 14 people there. And I knew Zach Bush was going to be there. And I was stalking him, like a cheetah stalking a gazelle in the Serengeti. I'm like, where is he? When's my right opportunity? And we were walking to the lab at one point, and he said, so how are you involved in this? And I said, well, I started stumbling over my words. And then I said, well, I was trying to come up with something clever, but I have nothing right now. And my friend Hillary said, well, he was Dr. Joe Dispenza's writer and editor. And Zach was just like, really? Are you available? And my jaw dropped. By the time we got to the lab, he asked me for my number. And, I just helped him complete his first book. He's this triple board certified doctor with the soul of a poet and a mystic, one of the most eloquent people. He could take you from the mitochondria to the furthest reaches of the galaxy in 20 minutes. And you're like, what just happened? But my mind is completely blown. You're definitely going to be hearing a lot about him in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'll check it out right after this podcast. So this writing exercise that you do daily, it's 5 things you're grateful for, and then 5 things you want to accomplish.
You want to create. So I literally write down, today I am so grateful for, and I write down 5 things, or I might write more than that. I just kind of do it in a paragraph. You can do it numbered if you want, and then I say, today I intend and create, and I just write that down, and I close the book, and I don't think about it again. But I've had so many people who've read the book and reached out to me, and they said, you're not going to believe what happened. And I say, yes, I do, because it happens to me all the time. I think it's just a really powerful exercise. I do it with my coffee or tea in the morning. It's one of the first, on most days I'll meditate, and then I'll have my coffee and my tea, and I just do that exercise. And I mean, what better way to start a day than to move into gratitude instead of fear or jumping into the news, which is nothing but fear porn. And, just you just take a moment to pause. And what am I grateful for in my life right now? Okay, what do I want to create in my life? So I encourage everybody to try it. There's one other thing that's kind of wild that I started doing, and I did a little Instagram post about it, and I've had multiple people reach out to me. Before I go to bed, I say, I choose to awaken in my highest timeline. And then when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I say is, I awaken in my highest timeline. And I've had multiple people start to do it and reach out to me. And, in one regard, you're programming your subconscious mind in your sleep. And the first week I started doing it, I got a new literary agent. I wound up I just woke up and I said, okay, I'm going to invest in this thing. And I liquidated some Apple stock and invested in this thing right before it kind of started to pop. And I don't know, maybe in the follow-up book to Dream Tethering, I'll figure out the mechanism. But like I said, like I always tell people, intention goes so far, but most of us are just kind of moving through the program. We're checking off the boxes of what we're supposed to do every day, and we're not actually thinking about what we really want out of our lives.
100% agree with that. Yeah. And one of the best analogies I've heard used about that is if somebody came to you and said, hey, I want to build a house. And you said, okay, well, how many rooms is the house going to have? And they said, well, I don't know. How many bathrooms is the room going to have? Well, or the house going to have? I don't know. Do you have blueprints about this house? How you intend for it to look when it's completed? Well, I don't know. Uh, I don't have that. And it's funny because it seems so crazy. Any one of us, if somebody came to us and said, yeah, I'm going to build a house, but I don't know how many bedrooms it has, bathrooms it has, what it even looks like, how many stories it is, and I certainly do not have blueprints outlining any of that. You'd be like, this guy's nuts. You don't even need to know anything about architecture or construction to say, look, this, I don't know how you're going to build this house. But when it comes to life and intention, seemingly it's just so overlooked. And it's such a weird thing because we're not building a house, we're building something far more important, which is our life. And you have to have that intention to create and design what it is that you want. But we're never taught that. And somehow, for whatever reason, that really isn't innate until somebody at some point explains that or has written that. And then you see it and you say, well, wow, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that is brilliant. I've never heard that before, but it's just gets right to the point like that.
Yeah. So let me ask you, when you say before you go to sleep, when you wake up, and you say, I intend to wake up in my highest timeline, is that what you said?
I choose to awaken in my highest timeline.
I choose
Yep.
to awaken in my highest timeline. So, what
Yeah.
is your highest timeline? What does that mean?
Um, I mean, my highest timeline is the life I've designed for myself and where I want to go. And, that's that's the right things, the right people, the serendipities and synchronicities showing up, the right agent. I just got this new literary agent, and my former literary agent was I didn't even realize kind of what a legend he was, but he put Eckhart Tolle on the map and Neil Donald Walsh. He's worked with Neil Young. He did the Dummy series, and he totally got what I was doing. I had all these conversations before him. He got what I was doing. He picked me up like that, and I was working with this other guy, and he said, "No, you really got to take this meeting with this big London literary agent." And so I did, and it took me 4 months to get a meeting with her, and then 3 months for her to get back to my proposal. And she turned me down. And so then I went back to my other literary agent, who was an older guy, and he said, "Oh, well, I'm sick right now, but I'm going to be better next month." And he kept saying this. And then I think it was July, I don't know, 22 or something. He said, "I'm going to be better by September." And then he passed away a year ago in December. So I've had a bunch of meetings with other literary agents. And this is right around the time when I said the highest timeline, when I started that exercise. So I got this other meeting with this literary agent. And when I started the meeting, I said, well, my former agent, Bill Gladstone, and she was like, wait, what did you just say? She's like, I started my literary career with him 25 years ago. And I had actually been like asking Bill from the other side to just guide me to the right literary agent. So, yeah, again, intention. There is such a bigger field of reality and possibility that we are taught. Throughout evolution, we've been focused because of survival on the 3D world, which is the threat. But there is this entire other realm of energy, which we're just starting to really uncover through quantum physics. We lived in this Newtonian paradigm for the last 200, 300 years, which is, we understand how a jet can fly from New York to LA in 6 hours and whatever. But the quantum field is the greater umbrella structure within which the 3D reality works. And the quantum field is just a field of it's an endless field of energy. So when we start to learn how to tap into that, we become far more powerful creators than we think we are. And that, I think, that is what one of the big revelations of this spiritual revolution that's happening right now is, oh, we're so much more powerful than the diminutive little boxes that society and government and everything else put us into.
Yeah, and so I've done some reading on quantum fields, so I have a very simple grasp of what it is. But for somebody who maybe hasn't read anything about it or would like to learn more about it, can you explain that? What you mean by that? What is the quantum field? What is quantum physics, and what is that idea?
Well, the quantum field is, this unlimited field of energy, and it's Einstein said the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. So we are in the particle state. We're physical matter. So the field, if you think about it, you know, well, I'll just say like above the speed of light is nothing but energy. And then below the speed of light, you have the division. So above the speed of light, the energy is just the wave. But then when it breaks the speed of light, it turns into matter. So the energy and the particle are the same thing. They're just in two different states. So as that energy slows down, you have the third dimension of reality in which we're in. But there are all these other fields and dimensions of reality within the one which we're living in.
And you're saying you access that through intention and emotion?
Yeah, and I think getting still, and blocking out the external world and tuning into, just I mean, as simple as taking 5 or 10 minutes, setting an alarm, and just tune into the energy of your heart, and then I just kind of expand that field around me.
Yeah, I love that. And do you think it's important, going back to the idea of writing things down, how important is the writing process versus just thinking it or saying it?
I think writing is pretty important. I think writing and language is very important. The language that we use not only in our external world but in our internal world. I said like language is kind of, it takes this amorphous idea and concretizes it so that it takes the ideas and the feelings of life into something communicable. And I think that intention and that language is sort of the forging, is the force that forges the particle into physical reality. I know that sounds probably, I'm way too into my book right now to condense it into more simple language, but it's the thought and the signal. The thought sends the thought sends the idea out, the feeling pulls it back. That's the most simplistic way, I think, to do it. And those are sort of two halves of intention.
Yeah, and I think you have to believe it's true when you write it, yes?
Yeah, yeah. And when you do I'm guilty of it too sometimes. I just do the gratitude and intention exercise as something to check off, but when I'm really more present, you get into that feeling, because that feeling is sort of I don't know how else to explain it, but it's sort of the carrier wave that interacts with all the other possibilities. So when you feel it, you're starting to pull that into you. So most of us are operating out of unconscious programs. And, so that's what we're pulling. Again, the fear and lack. We're operating out of the unconscious program of fear and lack that we learned from our parents. So that's what we're pulling into our world. So you gotta become really aware of those internal programming conditioning and switch that, and continuously dream tether with the thought and the feeling and the right language, action, feeling, and thoughts to pull that thing to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the listeners, I hope this was helpful, revolutionary, maybe even in your thinking or the way you're seeing life and experiencing life. And so check out Tim's website if you want to learn more. And as always, thank you so much for joining today and listening. And if you found this helpful, make sure you like and subscribe so you know when the new episodes are dropping. Thanks so much for being here.